It's time once again for another edition of Talk to Me. And now, here's Emmy himself, 8-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, Maynard Eaton.
Hello again, everyone. This is Talk to Me, our conversation about race, civil rights, politics. And this week we have an expert on the subject of race. Her name is Dr. Tricia Rose, a professor of Africana Studies and director of the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America from Brown University. Dr. Rose, that's a long title. I guess you're a scholar on this issue, are you not?
Yes, I'm a scholar on race in America, mostly actually the post-civil rights era, but I do pay attention to the whole country's history.
What is the issue about race today? It seems like it's in every conversation. It's in our schools and private conversation. Race seems to be as prevalent now as it has been throughout my life.
Yes, Maynard. Well, it's such an important issue, and it's actually at the heart of the formation of the country itself and the idea of who, quote unquote, we are as people. So it's often treated as a topic that is secondary or, a sort of a negative byproduct of some bad attitudes or moral failings. But if you study the history of race in America fully from the beginning, you will see that some of the same kinds of core beliefs, values, attitudes that we find 300 years ago, we find today. They've evolved, they've been attached to different things that are going on in society, but it's an absolutely fundamental core part of our country's economic system, its social organization, its sense of itself. So that's why we see the ability for race to sort of rear its head in all kinds of places that you would think, why is this about race and what's going on and why is there so much passion and anxiety and worry?
I had the pleasure of hearing you speak last week here in Indiana, and I was disturbed to hear you say that race is troubling reality in America, that it's intertwined, that it's systematic. Can we ever get trouble? Can we ever solve it, the issue of race?
Yeah. I mean, look, when we think about racism, most of us in the United States are conditioned to think of it as just a sort of personal bigotry and hatred. And right. We think, for example, of the 3 men who gunned down Ahmaud Arbery, right, who were just convicted of hate crimes in addition to murder. And, what did they find? They found all kinds of texts and conversations and written evidence of them using horrible racial slurs and clearly exhibiting racial hate. And this is true and important, and it should not be minimized. But there is a much broader system that is based on producing systemic racial hierarchies and outcomes that do not rely on that kind of extreme hate. And so by focusing our attention on the idea that racism equals extreme racial hate, what tends to fall into the background and become much less visible is this vast network of policies and practices and institutions who, when taken together, generate rather extreme and reproduce rather extreme racially hierarchical outcomes. So when we see so much of this continuing, but we see so much less buy-in for that kind of extreme racial hate, we're confused. People will say, well, we passed laws during the Civil Rights Movement, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, so on, the Housing, Anti-Discrimination Housing Act. We've made racism illegal. So if there's disparity now, it's not because we have racial hate built into the laws. We actually have racial equality built into the laws. And so what we tend to do is to use that kind of progress as a way to hide and diminish the importance of what is still a structurally organized system of producing racial inequality.
you're writing a book about that because most folks don't get that, do we? I mean, we, like you said, we think it's over.
Yeah,
We've
yeah,
solved it.
no, I'm working now from now till the end of 2022. That's my goal, is to finish this book in 2022 that really tries to unpack all of these deep connections, because, we can say this, redlining happened and there's a wealth gap and it's a huge gap, and there's a massive, criminal justice, sentencing gap and arrest gap. And, we see all these things, but I want to put these pieces together, and I want people to think of them in a more collective whole. And part of the goal is to do something that's unusual, which is to sort of, have a bird's eye view and to drill down at the same time. So if you imagine that you want to go deep to see, how did this get this way? And then pull the lens out to see, oh, this is happening in lots of places, and just really understand the breadth of what we're dealing with. So yeah, I'm writing a book, and I'll be also doing another project related to it, but I'm going to keep that to myself till it all gets done. And Maynard, I'll call you when I'm ready.
Dr. Rose, how did you get here? I know you study, I know you're a scholar, but this is more than just a notion. You're really taking a major part of American society, are you not?
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. We all come, I think, on this earth with a mission. I mean, look at your commitment, right, to civil rights across your lifetime. Not everybody in your situation does what you do with it, right? So you have your own mission, and I don't know how we get our missions, but I was always very interested in and fascinated by and disconcerted by various sort of examples of significant inequality, and from very young, before I could really understand all the categories. So over time, I just refined that interest and spent more and more time thinking about it. But I also think a lot about culture and the role of expressive culture and music and art to be a place where people nourish themselves, challenge inequalities, but the idea that people can just be systematically treated with so little value, and all of their gifts can be sort of diminished and tamped down and manipulated and erased, and that so many people live with so much pain and suffering, some of which they just don't even know the point of origin for, that they think they themselves are 100% responsible for. That hurts my feelings in a fundamental way, and it makes me incredibly angry. And so part of my mission is to figure out how to explain it in such a way that can to create more buy-in from a broader range of people, rather than just the usual suspects, right? I want more people to really understand what we've created, because until we grasp it fully, we're not going to be able to dismantle it properly.
Dr. Rose, during your speech, you mentioned you got it early on, that even as a child, a young person, you said, this is not fair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no,
I mean, that was, I mean, I honestly, I think it was a combination of my upbringing. My parents were very invested in things that were just, and they were concerned about that. But it was my personality, I just was, some people should tease me and say, well, you're just a Libra, you're born in October, everything has to be, scales have to balance, otherwise you're not happy. Who knows what makes it so? But I remember very early thinking, there's a lot of categories where things aren't fair. Gender inequality, is insane. Economic, inequality is ridiculous. I was born to very, very humble background in Harlem and the Bronx in New York. And, eventually I went to a private school mostly for high school plus 8th grade, so 8th through 12th. And when I got to the school, I remember thinking like I had entered an entirely different world. It was maybe 20 miles from my actual house, maybe 15. New York is so dense, you think you're going a long distance, but in fact, it might have only been 10, 15 miles. And I mean, Maynard, it was like another world, and I just could not believe it. And I realized, there's no way I could work the rest of my life from sun up to sundown or sun up to sun up, never sleep, and go, 100 years, and I couldn't come close to the level of wealth that the people at this very elite private school took as, reasonable. And so that's the question, like, how does that happen? And why do we lie about education being this great equalizer? You can't create a system with this vast inequality and then say, oh, hey, you at the very bottom, work yourself to death in school and you'll get here, which is a lie, because they'll be somewhere else when you get there. They'll already been running. And it puts all the burden on you to make up the gap, right? So, I've always been very focused on those issues. I wish I could say why, but maybe it's just, being a child of the 70s and certain eras where, these issues were very prominent.
Dr. Rose, you speak about school. I was in a local school yesterday covering a Black History Month skit. And even the students were aware that Black history is kind of controversial now in schools. This whole thing about critical race theory. Some parents wanting it taught, others suggesting it's hurting their children to learn what they did and did not do if they were white students. Where are we in schools now with regard to this conversation about race? Is it being limited? Is it become so controversial and politically boxing match, if you will?
Yeah. Well, remember earlier on we were talking and I was saying, I want to dig deep and I want to pull the lens up and see the big picture. We want to do that with this issue too, because if you drill down and you look at critical race theory and you see, well, who's organizing it, who's manipulating, who's sort of facilitating a coordinated attack and a misrepresentation of what it is. But then if you pull the lens up, you'll see at every moment where racial justice movements, civil rights movement, Black Power movement, any number of other, Black abolition, movements across the last several hundred years, whenever that happens, Black Reconstruction, you get a huge backlash. And that backlash is intended to destabilize the progress, to challenge the normalcy of social change that civil rights movements have tried to produce. So every time you create any step forward, you should assume that there's going to be at least 2 or 3 steps attempting to push you back. So, Black Lives Matter and the police violence movements, where people are beginning to realize that the police really do treat different groups of people differently, and it's baked into the system. These are not just individual rogue cops. Of course, there are some rogue cops. And of course, there's some amazing individual policemen who do a hell of a good job. I think it's important to say that. But the institution and its purpose and its norms and its values overall are built in such a way as to normalize the mistreatment of Black people and to devalue their lives fundamentally in the way they're treated. Now, we made progress on that. And so now we're seeing a backlash. And so we're seeing that backlash in schools because people know that if you train and educate people to understand racism and to create a kind of collective social world in which people no longer feel that they should be invested in white priority or white privilege or white superiority, depending on what we're talking about. And you get young white kids who I think don't feel guilty about this. What they feel is curious and outraged, right? And then you build a multiracial alliance, right? As King and others, Fannie Lou Hamer and many others were working to do. Now you're really challenging white supremacy and white, institutional power. So that's what it's really about. It's a backlash. It's a manipulation. And it's designed to retain a kind of way of being white that is against a multiracial, equal society.
Wow. You mentioned Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr., and during your speech again, you mentioned how his history has been whitewashed. Well, this is the 65th year of the organization he co-founded, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. What do you think that organization is now? Does it still have relevance? Is it still making a difference as it was when he was leading the charge?
I mean, I won't confess to be an SCLC expert, but I'll tell you my general opinion about this. I think, look, there are no civil rights organizations that I think are irrelevant or, that shouldn't do the work they're doing. That said, I think that every organization has generational changes that they need to address, right? That is to say, things change as the world moves along, and we have to figure out how to move along with it. So that's true of higher education, right? I mean, a lot of us are still teaching like it's, 1870, but like, here's a Xerox, it's sort of ridiculous when you think about it. But all joking aside, any organizations that are trying to create dignity, opportunity, legal change, and to organize Black people for an equal world is worth it. But, there are new civil rights organizations that are doing really important work that I think we often don't appreciate as much because we have a kind of romance with the past, right? And some of that romance is necessary because Black organizations are underappreciated and valued for their contributions for making social change. So we should valorize our organizations in our past. But we have to figure out how to do that and also be open to like, hey, look, there's this whole internet out here and kids are working at a pace and they're thinking and communicating at a pace I think you and I, Maynard, couldn't possibly think at, even if we wanted to, right? I just don't think we were raised on that. You give a 3-year-old a computer right now and he or she will be facile on that thing in 6 minutes. And that's just the era they're in. So, thinking of the internet, thinking of a different way of responding to social media, thinking of different kinds of political engagement. I think that's what I would say about how we should imagine this, that it's not one set of organizations versus another, but that every organization has its primary era and that we should honor that history and we should make sure that we're open to new organizations too.
Speaking of an era, I'd like to, and a romance perhaps, Ambassador Andrew Young turns 90 within a week or so. Your thoughts about his many lives, the many hats he's worn, and his impact, you think, on the civil rights movement. At 90, he's still out there.
Yeah, I know. We have a couple of titans like this. We have, Harry Belafonte, we just lost Sidney Poitier, and Andrew Young is extremely important. And I think, we have to figure out, he's sort of a Renaissance man, right? He's been involved in everything from the arts to politics, to social organizing, to government. And all of that, I think, really speaks to the fact that these areas are all important for a healthy Black world. It's really important for everybody, but I'm speaking specifically about Black people. And one of the downsides of the present moment we're in is hyper specialization, right? Where you have to be so attuned to what's going on in your one area that you can't do anything else. So you're a teacher, or you're a politician, or you're a tech expert, or you're a religious leader trying to run a large congregation, or you're whatever it is. And so what I take away from Andy Young's legacy is this capacity to wrap your arms around all of those spaces, because your goal is not just to be an expert in one thing, but instead to be a steward of good health, good opportunity, community, and safety, and equality. So it doesn't matter what whether it's cooking, cleaning, journalism, government, because you want what the goal is, not the expertise in that one area. And the goal is the greater good and the common good. So, we should really be talking. We don't do well with elders in this society of any background, right? 90 is gone to people. It's like off the map. And there's so much to be said. I want to draw your listeners' attention to a podcast I did for a year during the pandemic with Cornel West. It was called, oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of it right now. It'll come back to me. The Tightrope. I'm having a senior moment. But we interviewed Sonny Rollins, whose birthday it was at the time. And he was also, I think, 90 or 91 that year. And it was he was filled with light, filled with energy, filled with vision. And so if any of your listeners, want to, I think it's on YouTube, if you just put in The Tightrope and Sonny Rollins or Cornel West or Tricia Rose, it's just brilliant. And his energy was so powerful. And I remember thinking the whole time, what we could do with his his gift now would be so important for young people to be bathed in, that energy of that light and what you know when you get to that age. So we really need to do a better job connecting the generations.
Dr. Rose, we certainly applaud what you know and what you share with us. Maybe Sonny Rollins is brilliant, but you are too. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Tricia Rose, who studies, is an expert on the study of race and ethnicity. I can't say the word, ethnicity in America. Dr. Rose, thank you so much for sharing a little of what you know, and we look forward to your book.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for listening, and I'm sure I'll see you again soon. Take care now.
Take care. This has been Talk to Me. Take care.